Hello and welcome to the Superposition Guys podcast. My name is Yuval, and my guest today is Tobias Lindstrom, Head of Science for the Department of Quantum Technologies at the NPL, the National Physics Laboratory in the UK. We discussed the critical role of national measurement institutes in the quantum ecosystem. Tobias explains how NPL bridges the gap between academia and industry, delves into the complexity of quantum benchmarking and standardization, and explores advancements in quantum communications, sensing, and computing. We also touch on the evolving quantum supply chain, the role of neutrality in measurement services, what the future holds for quantum technologies, and much more. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Tobias, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
So who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Tobias Lindstrom. I guess I have two hats. I'm the head of science for the Department of Quantum Technologies at the National Physical Laboratory in the UK. I'm also one of the principal scientists in the quantum computing circuits group in that department. So I work on as a scientist, I work on various problems related to scaling up of quantum computing. And then as a head of science, I take more of a sort of strategic role around the science we do and the type of metrology we work on for quantum technologies more in general. So that includes not only quantum computing but also quantum comms, materials, and quantum electrical metrology.
Quantum technology in general is getting a lot of attention and funding these days. So what is the role of a national institute like the NPL in this industry?
So NPL is part of the National Quantum Technology Program in the UK. So we sit alongside the academic efforts that are typically, from the UK hubs. I know you had Professor Tim Spiller as a guest a few episodes ago, and I think he described what the hubs do really well. Obviously, in the quantum technology program in the UK, industry also has a very prominent role, and both as a sort of users of technology and development and as investors. And I guess NPL sort of sits somewhere in between there. So we sort of, in what we do, we're function a bit like the link between industry and academia. But more specifically, our role is typically about being the home of measurement. So we provide work in both academia and industry, developing, in some cases, bespoke measurement solutions. We also help them in things like working on standardization of quantum technologies, where we represent the UK, and in many other roles. So obviously, quantum technologies is still an emerging field. So we're not quite at the level where you have more like NPL typically works with established industries, right, where we provide measurement services. We do not yet provide measurement services for most of the quantum technologies because they do not yet exist, but that's what we're working towards. So our role differs a bit depending on what we're doing.
If I think about a U.S. analogy, NIST, the National Institute of Standards in the U.S., has played an outsized role in PQC standards.
Yeah.
Are you driving any standards in the NPL today?
So we are the UK lead on standardization of all quantum technologies. So we work together with BSI, which is the standardization organization that represents the UK. But we provide most of the, not all, but many of the experts, and we also do a lot of the groundwork in terms of communicate with industry and trying to figure out what industry needs in terms of standardization. So we are active in most of the organizations around the world. So, ISO, IAC, ETSI, and also Sensenelec, which is the European organization, as well as, most of the industry organizations that are sort of interested in things like, for example, for quantum computing, there are a lot of the industry organizations that work on benchmarking. So QEDC, for example, we are a member of that as well. So we would sort of pop up all over the place.
And that actually leads me to something I wanted to ask earlier about measurement. So do you intend to have a quantum algorithm or quantum computer benchmarking service at the NPL?
That's a very good question. So we do have a team which sits within my group at NPL that do a lot of work on especially on benchmarking and metrics, and that most of that work is done together with the National Quantum Computing Center and also the Quantum Software Lab up in Edinburgh, as well with industry. Whether or not we will ever provide a service I think it's a bit uncertain. It's as you know, it's quite complicated to benchmark a quantum computer, right? So at the moment, the field is not mature enough for us to say we're going to do it as a service. We are very happy to work with industry. If someone comes to us and say, look, we have this quantum computer or this, this QPU, and we would like your help to sort of benchmark it and figure out how well it works. So then we have to do so. But what we can't do yet, and probably, to be honest, probably wouldn't want to do anyway, is say, yes, this QPU is better than the QPU of one of your competitors. Because one of our key roles in the UK landscape and also internationally is to be seen as neutral. So we don't want to pick favorites, right? We can help you with the R&D by doing benchmarking and so on. But we're not going to sort of say, again, as I said, pick winners. That said, I mean, benchmarking and metrics are coming up very, very frequently in international discussions about, again, standardization and also in other fora. And there, I think there is a need, not necessarily for services, but there is a need, I think, to find some sort of agreement about which benchmarks and also which metrics should be used in different contexts. And again, for computing, that's really complicated because, the different modalities and so on. But if you ask, potential end users and also, governments and so on, who are thinking about, okay, what should I invest in? One thing they really want help with is basically to figure out, what is best for their particular application. So again, in those situations, we have to help, but we're not going to be sort of, as I said, benchmarking the different platforms and then say, yeah, that company is better to company B. That's not our role.
Before we go back into benchmarking for quantum computers, sounds like a big part of measurement would actually be sensing and maybe communications. Are you also engaged in that?
Yes, we are. Especially quantum com side is something NPL does a lot of work on. So we do, and obviously that's a more mature both in terms of technology as a technology and also much more mature in terms of as a market, because obviously there is a supply chain. There are companies selling practical product, right? So yes, we are providing. There we are actually at the level where we can provide services and we can help companies validate their products if they want to sell them on. That said, I mean, even in content comms, it's still an evolving area. So there are still new technologies coming online, especially more recently, for example, satellite-based QKD. Right. So there's still a lot of R&D to do in that. Even on the measurement side, that needs to be done and understanding how to do that. Same thing goes with sensing. Sensing obviously is a very big field. In some areas, it's fairly well established how you do things because, frankly, the quantum sensor is just another type of sensor. So what you're benchmarking is not sort of the quantumness, if you can call it that, but just how well it works as a sensor. And then it, in a way, much easier because they can compare it with the classical version of the same sensor. But again, for some sensors, especially sensors that use, say, entanglement and things like that, it's much harder. And again, that's still a very much a field that needs more R&D.
It's easier for me to envision what you measure in a sensor, but you actually started your response talking about comms.
Yeah.
What is it that you can measure about quantum communications?
So in quantum comms, if you think about this at a network, right, with when you have something transmitting and then something detecting and then you have a link in between. So a lot of the work we do in the department is about things like measurements of single photon emitters and single photon detectors, qualifications of quantum random number generators, which are part of the quantum comms systems for say QKD. That's how you generate the random numbers. But there are also a lot of sort of what I guess we could call classical measurement that goes into that. So typically, because quantum comms, most of the time will use very low level signals. One thing you want is very low loss fibers, right, and low loss patch cables, and all of these measurements need to be, especially if you're part of the supply chain, you want to sell into that field, you might come to NPL and say, hey, I have this fiber, I think it's very low loss. Can you help me do the measurements? I can put that in the data sheet. So there's nothing quantum about the measurements or even about the product as such, but it's just that the end users in the quantum industry or at least in quantum technologies.
You mentioned supply chain. Do you assist companies or the government in understanding critical components of the supply chain? where they come from, what's at risk, where in terms of geography or otherwise?
Yes, we do. I mean, again, we're not the only ones in the landscape doing this, because again, we work very closely with other organizations. But yeah, that's definitely one of our roles, because NPL, I should say, is directly owned by the government. We operate as a company, but we're directly owned by DCIT, which is a government department. So it's naturally, it follows natural that they will come to us for advice and sort of seek information about what's happening in the various fields. But again, I don't want to say that we're the only ones doing that, because again, especially in the computing field, we have the NQCC and other organizations and the hubs, right? So we work very closely with a number of organizations in terms of advising government.
I did an episode on quantum benchmarking quite some time ago, and I think some benchmarks are more on the lower level, gate fidelity or coherence, and some are more application related. What's the largest algorithm or longest algorithm that I could run? Do you have an opinion if one is more important than the other, or you get asked about one more than the other?
I think that, this is a very good question, and it's a question that's being discussed a lot, especially in the context of standardization. My personal view is that ultimately what people care about, especially if you're an end user, or if you want to use quantum computing for something, is like the application level benchmarking, right? You want to know how well does this computer work for my particular application. The challenge, of course, is that those I need to be a bit careful. I know people are working on these, but I think everyone would agree to say that there's as of yet no really good way of doing that type of benchmarking, simply because we don't have practical quantum computers yet, right? So the types of problems you can run are simply too small to be of any practical interest. So when you do a benchmark, are you really testing a real world problem? The answer right now, I'd say no. But coming back to your question, I think the hardware benchmarking, in a way, it is more established if you do things like, obviously randomized benchmarking, different types of fidelity, to get the various types of fidelities. You can do, quantum volume and all of these things, right? So those things are more established. I think one thing we found, though, that even if someone says if someone puts a paper out saying I did randomized benchmarking and this is what I got, it's not. If you actually then check how they did it, it turns out the methodologies are actually still somewhat different. And I need to be clear, right? I'm not saying anyone is being dishonest here, right? Is that even the benchmarks, which I think people are assuming are well established, if you actually look at the details, it turns out there are slightly different ways of doing these. So you can get slightly different results. So that's one thing. Another issue, which is close to my sort of own sort of research as a scientist, is about especially if you look at solid state quantum computers, so say superconducting quantum computers, such as the one by IBM. If you do benchmarking and say, Tuesday afternoon and get one value, and then you run the same benchmark the following day, you're probably going to get another value, right? So then the question is, how do you report this data, and what data is because again, the end user probably doesn't necessarily care too much about what's the absolute best value you can ever get. They want to know what's the type of value I will get when I'm running it for my application. And we, again, sometimes those differences are really significant. I mean, again, I don't think, I think this is widely known in the industry, but it's maybe something that sometimes get lost when people are reporting their data in say, a press release.
You mentioned your scientific background, focusing on superconducting qubits. Are you excited about another technology? Have you seen wonderful things happen in photonics or in trapped ions or in something else that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the modalities are making really good progress. I mean, I think the oldest and all the modalities you just mentioned are doing really well. I think one thing to pick up on, which I wouldn't have predicted 2 years ago, is the great progress on, say, neutral atoms, and then so on, because they seem to be doing really well at the moment, even when you do gate-based, using gate-based approaches. So I think that's quite exciting. But I think one of the things I know this might sound a bit strange, but I think one of the things I do find most exciting is that all the platforms seem to be making good progress. I haven't really seen, all the main modalities that people have been working on. They all seem to be making good progress, and no one seems to have reached a point where they say, no, we can't develop it further, and people lose interest. Because you can in all the main modalities, there are companies doing really good progress, and there are coming up with exciting new results very frequently. So I don't know if that would answer your questions, but again, if I could pick one, it's probably neutral atoms. But again, I think obviously superconducting quantum computing is doing real good progress. Ion trapping is doing extremely well. There are lots of, especially in the UK, there are lots of spin-out companies working on photonic quantum computing, so that's doing very well as well. So yeah, there's lots of stuff going on throughout the whole industry.
And it seems like photonics and superconductings or trapped ions are merging a little bit once you talk about optical interconnects between multiple QPUs. Is that also an area that you're working on at NPL?
It's something we started looking at. So quantum networking is definitely something we're really interested in. And again, because we already done a lot of work on quantum communications, and we also do work on quantum computing. So this obviously would be a nice fit. There are also quite a lot of again, interesting measurement problems there, right? So, because one thing you probably need to do, again, and you certainly will need to do if you have a superconducting qubit and you want to convert to optical frequencies, you need transducers, right? So, and how you actually do the measurements of the transducers and all of these things is something we're really interested in, both on the measurement side and also in terms of working with various collaborators and developing new technologies for transduction.
We're recording this talk towards the end of 2024. Let's fast forward, say, 3 years from now. What would you like to see? What would you like your department to achieve or to see a couple of years into the future?
I think I would like to see, it would be very good, I think, if we reached a point where at least some companies are coming to us on a sort of fairly routine basis to do some validation of their product. Again, this is starting to happen, but again, in the quantum comms, it is this is more established. But if you're asking about the computing side, it would be it would be nice to get to the point where a company can come to us, we can do some testing, and then we can then get back to them and say, yeah, this is the results, and this is the measurement data, these are the uncertainties, and so on. It's going to take longer than that to get to the point where we can potentially provide people with sort of calibration certificates, because those type of services take a long time to develop. But yeah, that's probably where I would like to get to on the quantum computing side, that we reach a level of maturity where again, there is some agreement both among the measurement institutes of the world, but also among industries of what you want to measure, what you want to show your potential customers.
You mentioned collaboration with the QEDC around benchmarking. To what extent do you collaborate with other European or even Far East measurement or National Institute of Standards?
So we work a lot with national measurement institutes from across the world. So I think at the moment we have projects obviously with NIST, PTB, which is the German NMI, INRIM, which is the Italian NMI. Most of the European countries, so France, Denmark, Norway, Japan, South Korea. And I think one of the nice things about doing this type of work at an NMI is that it really is in sort of the DNA of a national measurement institute to do collaborations, because if you come to us and you want us to calibrate something, and I'm not talking about necessarily about quantum technologies now, but just in general, you want us to calibrate something and we give you a certificate. One of the things we guarantee is not only have we done the measurements, but we have also checked that our measurements agree with the measurements among the other NMIs across the world. So we do a lot of what's known as intercomparisons. So we exchange samples and so on and make sure we all get the same result. So that means that we already have very, very strong links to these organizations. And we are now seeing that in the area of quantum technologies, we're now picking that up, right? So that I think so that as those NMIs also start getting involved in quantum technologies, including quantum computing, those links are already there, and then there's quite easy for us to start collaborating with them in that area as well.
You mentioned how you're helping industry. How can industry help you or your department?
I think there are a couple of things that would be really useful. And again, I should emphasize, we do have very good links with industry. But I think we've found that especially, and this is now, I should stress, this is changing as the industry is becoming more mature. But many companies, especially in the beginning, are, if you're a startup, you're really protective of your IP. You don't necessarily know what you can and cannot say, and you don't necessarily trust an NDA, frankly. You don't necessarily, okay, even though I have an NDA, can I really tell people that? So we found it quite difficult sometimes to work with industry and get them to sort of tell us what they actually need. So, and again, there are sometimes good reasons why they want to keep their roadmap secure, right? But and not tell us everything. But it's been slightly frustrating sometimes when, especially in the context of standardization, we go to a company and say, what kind of measurement services do you think you will need in a number of years when you're a bit more established and you think you'll be selling products, and what can we help you with? And they don't really want to answer, or maybe they do want to answer, but maybe they're again very worried about sharing too much. And I should say, because when we do this in more established industries, we can talk to really big companies that sometimes about products that are worth a lot of money, and they are typically a bit more open. So that's one bit. I think the other bit is it would be nice to get more direct involvement from the quantum industry in international standardization. And I think some countries are doing this really well. So you go to international meetings and you find quite a few SMEs from, say, France and Germany and so on. But in some countries, and unfortunately that I think includes the UK, although again it's starting to change, they haven't been as interested in the work on standardization. And again, I can sort of understand that to some extent. They probably don't say, okay, our focus is on developing new products and we don't really see the value of standards yet. But at the same time, it really is the case that now the standardization is starting. If you're not at the table from the beginning, you do lose, you don't have a voice, right? So you do risk losing out in the long run. So I think those would, if I'm going to ask industries as a whole, we'll do two things: be a bit more open about what you actually need, not just to us, but more generally, and also be a bit more try to get a bit more involved in standardization. But again, as I already said, both of those things are slowly starting to change.
When I last visited NPL, there's a tree outside in the garden which is said to be a descendant of Newton's apple tree. So putting Newton aside, I wanted to ask you a hypothetical. If you could have dinner with one of the quantum greats, dead or alive, who would that be?
So I've listened to your podcast for a while, and I know some of your previous guests have sort of already said no, some of the names that would be high on my personal list as well. So I think Leo Szilard would probably be someone I'm not sure if you his counts as one of the quantum greats, but he definitely made some really fascinating contributions, especially around, the relationship with quantum information and sort of statistical physics and thermodynamics. And I will say, I think he was a fascinating person because he had a really fascinating career when moving from physics to the biology, and obviously his involvement with the first atomic bomb. So, he had a very fascinating life. I would have loved to sit down with and have dinner with him, towards the end of his career and discuss all the things he had seen and done and all the people he'd met.
And as far as I can tell, you are the first guest to mention his name. So
okay, that's good.
So Tobias, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.